Good evening, everybody, to tonight's planning committee. First of all, apologies for absence and substitution. Councillor Fairweather has told me that Councillor Altaf Khan is probably not going to be able to come along because of last minute. So I think other than that, I don't think we've received any apologies, have we? No. Okay. Oh, sorry, Councillor Roll.
Sorry, Anne Ruddersford, Councillor, can't make it this evening as well due to illness. Sorry.
Okay, so thank you. If we record her apologies too. Thank you. Moving on to declarations of interest. Does anyone have any declarations of interest on any of the planning applications? No, I don't see any, in which case we'll move on to the first application, which is for the Wainfleet building, St Clements. And I'd also remind councillors that the associated application, item 4, is purely the listed building one connected with the houses in St Clements, which is part of this application. Okay, thank you. So I will now hand over to Sarah Orchard, who will present the application. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. So this presentation relates to an application for the redevelopment of the site following the demolition of the Wainfleet building and the existing extensions at 9 to 13 St Clements, with the erection of new buildings to accommodate commercial uses at ground floor level, fronting onto St Clements, replacement student accommodation and sub-dean flats, and provision of a multi-purpose space. The scheme also includes the installation of a comprehensive landscaping scheme. So this is the application site. It is predominantly occupied by the Wainfleet building to the west of the site and 9 to 13 St Clements to the east, and sits on the northern side of the plain and St Clements in the St Clements and Iffley Road conservation area. Immediately to the west of the site lies the River Cherwell and Magdalen Bridge, and other notable buildings in the area include the main Magdalen College site to the north of the River Cherwell and the Magdalen College School to the south of the application site. The application site is currently a mix of business uses and college accommodation, and the proposed development would remain within these uses. So firstly, these are some photos of the existing site. The first photo, the top left, is a view over Magdalen Bridge. And the second photo is a view of the front of the Wainfleet building with the Sainsbury's unit on the ground floor. Also, in front of the Sainsbury's unit, as mentioned in the report, there is a lay-by which is occupied by a taxi in this photo. So these are some further photos of the Wainfleet building, one looking over Magdalen Bridge with the existing terrace, which is to be enlarged and landscaped. And the second photo shows the rear of the existing Wainfleet building. These are some further photos from the rear of the site, showing the relationship with the River Cherwell looking towards the existing terrace in York Place. The lower photo is an existing view looking towards the rear of the Wainfleet building and 9 to 13 St Clements. This shows some of the extensions which are proposed to be removed, and the existing tree as well, which would be removed. It's the common beech, which is a category C. And lastly, the picture on the right is a photo looking towards the front of the terrace in York Place with number 1 adjacent to the boundary. These are some further photos showing the relationship with York Place. And so this is the existing site plan showing the Wainfleet building, the L shape here, and 9 to 13 St Clements, with the rear projections projecting towards York Place, which are proposed to be removed. This is the proposed development for the site. So firstly, we've got the 9 to 13 St Clements, which sits here, and the proposed retail unit or business or commercial unit on the ground floor in this block, with the multi-purpose room, which would lie in this block with accommodation over towards the River Cherwell, two further blocks of towers here, which would sit adjacent to the River Cherwell. This is the existing terrace in York Place. And this is the section that's referred to as the link building, which would wrap around York Place, leading to the rear of 9 to 13 St Clements. On this plan, you can also see this is the plane tree that's referred to in reports, which would be retained. And then the trees that would be lost predominantly lie here under the proposed development in York Place. So these are the existing basement and ground floor plans. So here on St Clements, you can see this is the existing Sainsbury's unit with accommodation in this other section of the block, and also the rear projections to 9 to 13 St Clements. Again, you can see the upper floors of accommodation on the first and the second floors. And again, existing accommodation on the third and fourth floors. And this is the existing roof plan, currently a flat roof. So this is the proposed scheme, starting with the basement plan. First of all, here you've got the proposed multi-purpose room, which would lead out onto the enlarged river terrace, with other ancillary plant rooms included here, and the existing basements to the listed buildings. So this is the proposed ground floor plan. The multi-purpose room here is a double height space, so that is shown again, with the proposed commercial units and existing commercial units here along St Clements, with the proposed new access to the development here. And then to the rear, you've got the proposed accommodation in the two main blocks here, the link building, and the proposed cycle storage, which would be around this first courtyard here. These are the proposed first and second floor plans, which would all be student accommodation and flats. And again, here on the third and fourth floor plan, as go up through the stories, the amount of space at upper floors decreases, again with more accommodation. And here you've got the fifth floor plan, just the only fifth floor is here is in this tower, and the proposed roof plan with showing the solar panels on the flat roofs, and then also further solar panels on these pitched roofs. So these are the existing elevations. Firstly, the top one is the southern elevation from St Clements, with the existing access to the building here, with the proposed, the existing Sainsbury's unit on the ground floor. And then this is the view from the rear of the building. So these are the proposed south and north elevations in comparison. So here you've got the new building here, shaded in a different colour, with a larger element here, with windows here facing down into the multi-purpose space, and circulation space here, with the proposed business frontage in this block here. The lower elevation is taken from the north, which also includes the elevation from York Place and the two main blocks fronting onto the River Cherwell. These are the proposed west and east elevations. So the top one is taken from the River Cherwell, showing the multi-purpose space in the lower basement area here, spilling out onto the terrace adjacent to the river, and the two main towers here and here. Just to the left of this image, as referred to in the report, this is 1 York Place. And the lower elevation is the elevation taken from York Place. These are some internal elevations from within the proposed courtyards. So the top one is showing the rear of the buildings facing onto St Clement's. And here you can just see the covered cycle storage. And then you've got other internal elevations of the rear of the towers from within the development. And then also the rear of the blocks that would face onto York Place as well, with more cycle storage in here. So these are some proposed visuals of the development. The first one is taken just before you go over Magdalen Bridge into East Oxford. The development would sit here within the trees. And as you go over the bridge, the development would become more visible and would sit here. These are some proposed visuals from York Place. So the first one is a view looking into York Place. The terrace that's referred to a lot in the report sits here just behind the existing tree, with the proposed development behind. The building to the left is 9A York Place. And then the lower image is a contextual elevation along the River Cherwell, showing the scale of the development proposed in relation to 1 to 7 York Place here, and then you can also see the Florey building as well. And these are proposed visuals from Christchurch Meadow. So the development would just be visible here between the trees. And then a second visual looking down Cowley Road towards the plain. And again, the proposed development would sit here behind the trees. So that is the end of the presentation. There's a couple of verbal updates to make. So for clarity, as set out in the listed building consent, the application we're going to hear next, there's a small amount of less than substantial harm associated with the loss of the rear projections to 9 to 13 St Clement's, which is clearly and convincingly justified with sufficient public benefits, which would outweigh the harm. This also applies to this application, and it does not affect the recommendation made in this report. Secondly, we would like to add a condition for clarity to clarify the use of the multi-purpose space, because this hasn't been defined in the application description or the documentation. As considered in the officer's report, this would primarily be ancillary to the student accommodation. So we feel that a condition to clarify that would be appropriate. The development is considered to result in a higher standard of student accommodation in a more energy efficient building. The low level of less than substantial harm associated with the loss of the existing building and the extensions to 9 to 13 St Clement's would be outweighed by the design and energy efficiency of the replacement building. The impact on neighbouring amenities on balance considered acceptable in an urban environment. The officer recommendation is therefore to approve planning permission subject to conditions and the Section 106 agreement as set out in the officer's report.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Now, I have Dr. Peter Collins, who I understand wants to speak against the application. If you could come forward, Dr. Collins, and if you press the button and the red light should come on. And you'll have 5 minutes to speak. Press the one on the right and then a red button will come on when I turn mine off.
Right then, I'll press on the right again. Sorry? Am I pressing the wrong button? Oh, it's this machine. I could do that one, that's fine. Good, thank you.
Sorry for that.
No, I'm grateful for your help. I'm grateful to be able to speak. Thank you for letting me today. 5 minutes is too short, but let me try to do my best. Although known by heart by many, to heart by many, I would encourage all in this room, wherever they are, to read the detail of city planning policies H14, RE2, 7 and 8, and DH1 and 2 in detail, which so closely have bearing on what I have to say today. I want to spend most of my time on the devastating effect on the greatest amenity of which the residents will be deprived unless modifications are made to the plan. I will first note that my 30 years on the Council of Europa Nostra, that leading European non-governmental cultural heritage organization, as one of the judges recommending new buildings and renovations in the UK for international prizes, which architects clearly cherish, we would not place this application here on the shortlist. It is clearly second-rate architecture, the massing is too great, it is overcrowded and overbearing, and badly occupies the site. And it incorporates the modern fad for towers, which are here too high in respect of all the understandings in respect of Carfax, etc., and all greatly spoil the world, all of it spoils the World Heritage level of walk enjoyed by hundreds every day from Long Wall, seeing Magdalen and Magdalen Tower, the buildings on the Botanic Gardens, the famous Danby Gate, and the marvelous bridge. This site will remain controversial and an albatross round the city's neck if allowed to go ahead. Whereas the present building, not a great architectural jewel, but very well crafted, which is half hidden amongst the real jewel of the trees on the plain, could be to a great extent modified to meet modern standards. York Place, they talk about on balance here, all the decisions, the basic things which are wrong are things which are already imagined to be on balance. And that's why it matters so much what you decide today and how nearly it could be the other way. And I think it could be a long way the other way. So York Place is not, I quote, an urban environment within this city centre location. It is part of St. Clement's and has been treated as such for many years, and certainly the last 40, where I've lived and been secretary of the Residents' Association. In that time, I've worked with the planners to retain that, and it cannot now be considered something different, such a knee-jerk reaction to a second-rate plan. The residents' greatest amenity, having full light to enjoy in gardens on the rivers, we haven't been shown pictures of that, and from the balconies on the second floor, which look down the river and see the large green sward, also not shown in full, which separates us, very welcome, and we were promised when I moved in 40 years ago that had no intention of building on, and the city would stop any building on that green sward. So we are surprised now, not only to see the fifth story building right up against us 2 meters away, but a 7-story behind and on the river. As we look down the river and see the greenery, we see the wildlife, we see the swans coming up and down and nesting on the under the bridge. It is a wonderful thing for us, and we value it greatly. And I'll come on to talk about that more as we go on and give detail. The residents' greatest amenity, having full light, as I say, and enjoy the gardens and stuff, and the river, and are approaching our houses from the other side. We see every day between the nicely put our buildings with a space being the green sward, not shown to you in full, a large green sward between us and the current Wainfleet buildings. You look through it and you see the green trees and you see Magdalen Tower behind. It is a great welcome to the site. And now we're going to get ourselves enclosed by the smaller buildings. We're not going to be able to see it as we walk in. And on the other side, of course, our buildings are like this. You haven't seen that. I've been to meetings with the architects, and I've seen and discuss with them the terrible thing of if you have art buildings like this, you've seen the pictures slightly, with this very high building on the river by even higher building, much too high, beyond it. And I've spoken to the architects at length in many of these meetings, and they would find no difficulty in doing as we have pleaded all the time, that first building should go. That's just the compromise. There are other buildings which should be rearranged. And in any case, I've talked about the general plan, but the things that really affect us is right up against us is this building, for which there's no need to be there. And the architects would move it, but they said to me, our Magdalen have told us we should keep it. And we've pleaded with Magdalen, and they make suggestions. We go to meetings with them and discuss and how they would take notice. And they take no notice at all of anything we say. In fact, they've even written to number 1 York Place, this isn't a planning matter, to try and deprive them of the legal power of the legal to write, to light.
Dr. Collins, I think your time is up.
Oh.
Don't know if you want just very briefly to sum up. Then I will obviously, if we've extended your time a bit, obviously we'll let those speaking in favour of the application have exactly the same amount of time.
Well, you're very kind, and I appreciate that greatly.
Sum up very briefly, thank you.
Yeah, I'll try and make it as brief as I can. As I say, it could be, we had the compromise, which is still bad for us, but at any rate, it would do away with the thing that is devastating for us. And that would be possible even within the current plan, let alone the value of the whole plan, which is something I've addressed already. And all I would say is that there is a difference between having homeowners who have the right for their general amenity to be respected, and their right to having light and sit in their garden with their amenity respected. And undergraduates, I mean, as the surveyor said to me, I think he's here with us this afternoon, we like to have the green within our buildings, where the undergraduates who are there 6 or 7 months of the year can enjoy it, whether it's depriving us of our major amenity and something which we were promised as a residential area within the city, which is what St Clement's is, and we are very much part of that, St Clement's is, and we worked with the planners and the city all these years to maintain it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Collins.
I'm sorry, I was just too short.
That's okay. If you could go and sit down, and then if those speaking in favour of the application could come forward. Thank you.
They should have their go.
I believe you've got 7 minutes between you. So if you're happy, you know how to, you can divide that up. That's great. Thank you. And also, if you'd be willing to stay just to answer any specific questions that the committee might have afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. My name's Dinah Rose. I'm the president of Magdalen College. The site of the Wainfleet building is of considerable significance to the city of Oxford. It sits, as you've seen, right on the plain, close to Magdalen Bridge and close to Magdalen Tower. And it's one of the first buildings that people see when they arrive in central Oxford from London. In a real sense, it is the gateway to central Oxford. And unfortunately, the verdict of both Historic England and the conservation area appraisal is that the current Wainfleet building is not worthy of this prominent site. As Historic England have said, it doesn't respond sensitively to the surrounding townscape, and it detracts from the St Clement's and Iffley Road conservation areas. The overhang outside Sainsbury's has unfortunately proved to be a magnet for antisocial behaviour and for the gathering of litter. Not only that, the concrete strip in front of the Wainfleet building and the cliff face of the Wainfleet building itself blights the view to the north from Magdalen Bridge. If you're looking over to the south, you see lovely green space. To the north, all you see is concrete. From the perspective of the college, there is an acute problem. the Wainfleet doesn't meet the current or future needs of our community. The rooms are very poorly insulated, both in terms of energy and heat, and in terms of sound. You can hear your neighbour breathing. The washing facilities were designed for an all-male college in the early 1960s. They are now wholly inadequate. Because of the poor quality of the accommodation, it's only feasible for us to use it for first-year students, because the older students will vote with their feet. If they were offered a room in the Wainfleet, they'd reject it and instead go out into the private housing market in Oxford, which of course nobody wants. But we can't get a whole year group into the building, it's too small. So the outcome is that our first-year students are inadequately housed, they're split into separate groups, and they're outside the main college site. What we would like to have is a system where all of our first years live together inside the college, where they can more easily forge a cohesive community, while there is a handsome new quad for a mixture of older undergraduates on the site of the Wainfleet building. We are prepared to invest very significant sums in this beautiful riverside site. And that's one of the striking things about the Wainfleet building. It is a beautiful site in order to create a space of the highest quality with a green, biodiverse riverside garden where there's currently concrete, with ensuite rooms, with communal kitchens that are generously sized and large enough for people to eat together in, and that will meet the college's needs for the foreseeable future, enabling us to keep our own students inside the boundaries of the college and out of the private rental market. We have very closely considered the option of refurbishment of this building that Dr. Collins referred to. The committee will have seen the detailed explanation that we've given for the many reasons why this simply, unfortunately, is not feasible, including the fact that the building isn't fully accessible, the fact that there is substantial asbestos in the building, and most fundamentally, its concrete grid is too small to accommodate the necessary ventilation and other equipment for modern needs. Historic England has praised the quality of the design of our architects, Stanton Williams. They've said that this is a thoughtful and creative response to both the needs of the college and the surrounding townscape, which responds much more positively to the river and to the bridge. Historic England have also commented that the way that the building steps down towards the listed buildings on St. Clement's is very effective, as opposed to the current Wainfleet building, which just seems to be plonked next to St. Clement's. We intend this to be a building that is both beautiful and practical. We will use the best quality materials, including honey-coloured stone on the buildings that face the centre of town, and a rendered finish on St. Clement's that merges, fits much more harmoniously with the listed buildings that are rendered there. We're also looking at a highly sustainable building. We are targeting certified passive house standard for most of the building, except for the listed buildings. Views from the bridge and from both St. Clement's and the Cowley and Iffley roads will be vastly improved. We hope that this building will significantly enhance the environment of the Plain and St. Clement's and assist in their regeneration. We will provide further benefits to the public as well, including the multi-purpose event space that you've heard about, which opens onto the river and that we would be happy to make available to community groups for things like yoga and Pilates, for which it would be ideal. We have consulted the public extensively on our plans. We've had 2 design review meetings, 2 public exhibitions, and 4 meetings with the York Place residents. We want to record here our particular gratitude to both Sarah Orchard and Jill Butter, who have challenged us over the last couple of years at many meetings and who have consistently improved our designs. And I remember in particular Jill's urging that we should have buildings of sufficient scale on the river to balance the very important Florey building. We are highly conscious of the concerns of the residents of York Place, which the committee's just heard from Dr. Collins. And we have sought over the past months to do all that we reasonably can to accommodate them. We understand that construction is disruptive and that any change to the vicinity of a much-loved home is bound to be unwelcome. Over the past months, we've made a series of alterations to our scheme to meet their concerns. We've reduced the height of the buildings, we've moved them further back from the boundary line, and we've altered the elevation and successfully ensured that the council's daylight recommendations
I
are
think
met.
you've had time now.
Thank you. The last thing I wanted to say is that the views in York Place itself will be greatly enhanced because that will now be a landscape muse instead of a view of bins. Thank you very, very much for your patience.
Thank you. And as I said before, if you're happy to stay there and
Yes.
perhaps prepared to answer questions. Right, committee, questions for our officers and okay. Councillor Upton, Councillor Fairweather, right, okay. Upton, Fairweather, yeah, I've got you.
So actually, I'm starting not with my question, but I've just realised declarations of interest at the start. I noticed that Civic Society and OPT had both commented on this, and I'm a member of both of those, but I'm not nowhere on their, I'm not on their planning committee or involved in any way in commenting on their planning applications. Sorry, just should have said that at the start.
Do you have a question?
Not yet.
Okay, in which case, Councillor Fairweather to kick off.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is probably a question more to the applicant rather than the planning officers. The frame structure of the Wainfleet building would seem to lend itself to a comprehensive overhaul rather than demolition. Other colleges in Oxford with similar age and structure buildings have overhauled rather than demolish. Would the college like to clarify why they feel so strongly that a new building is needed?
This is not working. Can you sorry, I'm Stephen Sensigal, planning consultant to the college. I'm going to ask Mr. Henderson to deal with that. He's the architect. He said passing the ball swiftly leftwards.
Pass the microphone.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, I think, firstly, I think the whole project team, the college and the design team are strongly committed to retaining existing buildings where possible, both for heritage reasons and embodied carbon reasons. We did our own heritage study, which has, I think, been supported by the conclusions of Historic England and, in fact, the 20th Century Society, that the building didn't have significant heritage contribution to make. But a lot of work was done on the embodied carbon implications of retention or demolition. We did a whole series of different studies to look at what could be done with the existing building. We talk a lot about whether buildings have good bones or not, and you're right to mention the frame. If the frame and the bones are right, you can do a lot with an existing building. In this building, they form a real constraint because of the floor-to-floor heights. What we found was that we couldn't install the kind of mechanical systems that are needed to make an energy efficient building within the building. So the aspiration to reduce our operational carbon footprint was not achievable within this building. We couldn't adapt the space and create high quality student rooms, and we couldn't create the number of student rooms that were needed on site. So adaptation meant a loss of accommodation, provision of inadequate quality, and an inability to deliver on the sustainability targets. We did look at, the most viable option, which was a refurbishment of the existing building in terms of its carbon impact. But we looked at it very closely.
Councillor Henwood.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going back to Dr. Stevens and raising his concerns. So have officers visited the site at York Place to examine the possible loss of amenity? And I have an observation I'd like to put forward from my experience in Cowley, in that we had a similar application at night, light flooding from the building when the hallways are lit up. Is this going to have an impact on their amenity as well? I don't think it's
Are you asking a question about sort of essentially light pollution? And
yes,
the effect, okay,
yeah,
and the effect
it does
on
affect
local residents?
local neighbourhoods when in the dark. Thank you.
Sarah, I don't know who wants to answer that about the impact of lights late at night. Sarah.
Yeah, I think if we go back to the proposed floor plan, sorry. So sorry, just to clarify, you're talking about the windows in the Link building here adjacent to York Place?
Not necessarily the windows, but the hallways, they're normally lit up at night, I believe.
So on that building, which it sits alongside York Place, that is a passageway, so it's a corridor rather than, well, you could call it a hallway. It has reduced windows on that. I mean, the development of the design was that that building was set back further so that the boundary wall is retained, the plot boundary wall is retained, and that's one of the issues. But also those windows along there have been minimised in terms of their size and the impact of any light in those corridors.
Thank you.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. I've got three-ish sort of, so I'll try and keep them together in a rational order. So the first one, it's a sort of smallish issue, but I think an important one. And it's not. Is it an interest? I don't think it's a massive interest, but as somebody who cycles to and fro around the plane on a daily basis, the safety of cycling provision is quite important. The retail unit, which is currently the Sainsbury's unit and will be whatever takes the slightly smaller unit, there is a brief mention in the report about the impact of servicing for that retail area, which I can tell you, as anyone who cycles around that will know full well, that you are secondary to the Sainsbury's delivery vehicle, and indeed the buses being used to travel pupils to and from local schools. So the red line seems to be not including the lay-by and the servicing arrangements, but there is a suggestion of some kind of condition. I wonder if you could shed some light on that. And while you're in the same general area, and this time with two wheels, there is cycle parking currently at the front there. That is used by people using the retail unit for obvious reasons. It's convenient for them. Unless I've misread the report, there's a suggestion that that will be removed and placed around the back for residents. So what happened to the cycle parking for the retail unit users? Are they supposed to go to the nearest, which is on that island in the middle of the roundabout, well, on the edge of the roundabout? That seems to be an impact that hasn't been considered. So those are my two sort of starting points, one. And then the second one was, previously there have been discussions about public access to the river side here, even a suggestion not that long ago that it might be possible to open up that access to allow children commuting to the school on the other side of the road to travel through there. Is that a planning issue? Is that something that was considered, or is that just not achievable within this particular site? And then the final, probably the most important one, I think it is, clearly we are considering item 3 on the agenda, which is the application for the building. The application for the building involves the demolition and the replacement of substantial parts of the listed buildings on 9 to 13 St Clements, which are subject to a separate planning application. If we approve this one, have we not in effect approved, bypassed the discussion of the second one, or are we voting on them separately together as part of a single thing? And if so, could we hear more about the detail of that removal of the substantial quantities of listed buildings? There is a presentation, I believe, and I'm sure lots of input, but it does seem to me difficult to take a decision on this without having that input.
Thank you. Jill, do you want to advise on that?
Yeah, do you want to do the cycle and start
Yes,
and go
yes,
through in
let's do
order?
that.
Yeah. Thanks.
Sorry, I might need you to remind me because there's quite a long list.
Sorry, lorries, buses, water, listed buildings.
Yes.
Cycling.
The first one was the safety of the lay-by to the front of the Sainsbury's unit. So in terms of that, the retail unit is actually being reduced in size. It's not anticipated it would have deliveries on the scale of Sainsbury's lorries using that space. So in terms of the impact on that space, Highways have considered that although that lay-by would still be there, that's outside of the applicant's control. Obviously, there are other users that use that lay-by. The impact and the demand that this development is having on that lay-by would hopefully be reduced. And then there's cycle safety and cycle stands as well to the front. So yeah, there are a number of Sheffield stands located to the front of the Sainsbury's unit. As many as possible, so you can probably just about see it here, would be re-provided. I think there'd be the loss of 2 spaces, which is covered by the Section 106 agreement, which would require a Section 278 agreement with Highways to re-provide that elsewhere because it can't be accommodated in the red outline. In terms of safe cycle access to the site, at the moment in the centre of the plain here, there's a section with drop curbs where cyclists, if they're approaching from the east from St Clements or Iffley Road or Cowley Road, they could stop adjacent to Magdalen College School and push their bike across. This would unfortunately no longer directly align with the access to the building. So it's proposed that those drop curbs would be amended to better align with the new access to the building so that cyclists don't have to considerably push their bicycles along the pavement on the northern side of the plain. I don't know, does that address everything?
There was all the wheeled vehicles, and then there was the public access to the river, and then there was the conservation issue.
So the public access to the river is understood that Magdalen College School already have access. So school buses use this lay-by in front of the site. There's a staircase that goes down to the river terrace. There's an access under the bridge to avoid school pupils having to walk across the plain. And it's understood that that access would remain, and that would be still the current arrangement. In terms of general public access to the river terrace, this isn't something that it's currently available, and there's no planning requirement to make that a publicly accessible space. However, the applicant, in terms of their proposal, they are proposing this multi-purpose room. So there is potential that when an event is taking place or a certain user group is using that, it is primarily designed to be ancillary space for the students, but in the event that that space is being let out, then members of the public, if they're attending that, would be able to access that river terrace.
Does that answer your questions? Do you have?
No, not a big one.
No, and that was rather confused at the beginning, and we thought it was better to take the 2 separately, as in the sense that they're separate applications. But I'm very happy to go through the presentation if that helps and clarifies the issue of the demolition of the rear ranges of 9 to 13. There's other elements within 9 to 13 which clearly don't fall under the planning application, but fall solely under the listed building consent application, and I can cover those separately afterwards. if that's helpful, no, but if that's helpful to go through the rear ranges buildings to explain that, then I can do that, Sarah, if you can.
Chair, can I make a
Yeah,
suggestion? If it might be worth going through everyone who wants to ask a question on this application, doing the round of questions on this application, but before we decide to close that and move to comments, then to do the presentation for the listed building application, which then gives committee a chance to ask specific questions about that item. And then following that, you can obviously make comments to your heart's content on 2 items, and then we'll take 2 separate votes. Legal agree?
People happy with that? I think that's a sensible approach. Are there, sorry, Emma.
Yeah, I was just going to confirm that as long as they're 2 separate votes, that's fine.
Yeah, we'll make clear that the votes are considered separately. So do we have any more questions?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to understand more about the limits on height and general planning policy. I mean, I'm new to Oxford, or I've been here for a decade, but it does seem to me that buildings are getting taller and taller, given what, we've seen at St Hilda's. And I mean, I will add to this in the comments, but a tower is going up on the plain, which is an area of very low level building. So I was just wondering, when we talk about, well, when we hear that this tower has already been reduced, what criteria are we looking at in terms of planning policy around tall buildings in a historic city such as Oxford?
Yes, I can answer that. I can explain that we originally had the Carfax rule, which was 18.2 metres, and then there is an above ordnance datum level as well within that. But the problem with that is that you end up with everything coming up because every developer takes you up to 18.2, and we felt that actually in urban design terms that wasn't working very well. So we've got a slightly more nuanced policy now, which comes in DH2, which is supported by a technical advice note. I can't remember which number it is, but there's a technical advice note which all the work done on heights and views. And it was heights and views in relation specifically to the historic skyline. So we were looking at, the towers and spire composition, which creates the skyline, which is very important to Oxford and culturally to Oxford, obviously. In terms of this application, we've looked at it specific. So in that sense that we look at each case on its own merits rather than specifically, and the tests are done in terms of heights on that basis and the impact of those heights. So in terms of this application, we looked at those buildings within views that were important, such as views from Christchurch Meadows, for example, where you see Merton Tower, and you see with Christchurch in your or some of Christchurch in your foreground, you have Merton Tower and you have the Magdalen Towers, and that they form part of the skyline group, obviously, and from that view, they are quite important. And looking at that, that was why there was some level changes within what was originally proposed and the hard work that we were doing in order to try and get something that we felt was more acceptable in some of those views in terms of the impact they have. And they sit really subserviently against those towers. The Merton Tower, the Magdalen Towers sit out very clearly, and these buildings don't sit within that context. In fact, because of the composition of the buildings on this site, they sit very much as a built form that picks up some of the referencing of the architecture of Oxford, but it sits back in the same way that St Hilda's does actually in those views. And again, St Hilda's, we looked at those issues very, very carefully in terms of views. We looked at the views from South Parks and the views across and how you see those towers and how you see the skyline collection in that views, where you get, in those views, you get the Radcam and you get St Mary's and you get some of those other buildings coming into play. You get Tom Tower. And again, we looked at the buildings in that composition and how it impacts on that. So it's a much more nuanced view on heights in terms of the impact and taking each case on its own merits, if that helps.
Okay. Right, Nigel and Rosie.
Well, that's good because I want to carry on with the heights issue, if I may, because I understand your explanation about the other historic towers in the city. But one of the things about this site at the moment, you could argue, is that the Wainfleet building and the adjoining buildings around it, the height is arguably proportional. I mean, the Wainfleet doesn't leap out of the page at you in quite the way this proposal has. So I'd like to understand a bit more about the compromises on height, because I think one of the speakers said earlier on that there was maybe an idea to have a higher tower, and there was a compromise made. I think you said that at one point, one of the speakers did. I'd like to understand a bit more about that compromise. And I'd also like to understand a little bit more too about what looks quite a windowless building, actually, when you cross over the bridge going towards the plane roundabout. You know, it looks quite, well, it looks just like a tower block, really. But there doesn't seem to be many windows. Was that a conscious decision from that point of view or not? Because when you look at that there, that's the shot I'm thinking about. They look very freestanding, and they look quite windowless, and they look tall in relation to the other buildings around them. So I just want to understand a bit more about the thinking, maybe the architectural thinking and the compromises that were made in that, please.
It definitely wasn't a compromise because I don't compromise. And it was definitely a testing of them. I think in the initial idea was that it was a punctuation mark, and there was a conversation about the building having the towers, having a conversation with the Magdalen Towers on the other side of the river. So there was a sense of equality. And then when we tested in views, it was felt that actually that wasn't working terribly well. And it wasn't a compromise. It was a looking at the impact. So I think that was really the issue. In terms of the appearance of the buildings, there was still a sense of a need to create a punctuation mark, I think, at that point, and the architect can describe it probably far better than I can. In terms of windows, I mean, there are windows in those buildings. I think it's difficult to see on the image, but there are rooms and there are windows. So yes, I mean, there are windows. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 windows in the right-hand side. I think the image is quite difficult. And then you've got a whole series of windows that run, and they're gathered together. They don't form the rhythm of the Wainfleet, in which follows the rhythm of the express frame, where you get them at a consistent run. But they sit together, and that's part of the design of the building and the design of the building, which again, the architecture was designed to pick up on the sort of, in a way, the sort of medieval collegiate architecture of Magdalen, and picking up on the idea of the stone and the patterns of windows. And then with windows, in terms of passive house, there's the concern about, you know, if you have huge amounts of glass and huge amounts of windows, it doesn't work very well. But I'm sure the architect can deal with that much better than I can. But those were the things. It wasn't a compromise. It was definitely a working with the views.
It would very definitely, yes, please.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I think it's been a very interesting and aspirational project to work on in terms of our brief from the college. And one of the key aspects, I think, that we were asked to do was not to build the kind of efficient slab of student accommodation that actually is very cost effective, but isn't a good urban neighbour. And what we started to do from the beginning was to try to look at a scheme that had a very varied and broken skyline. So there are different types of buildings, there are different heights of buildings. There's a group of buildings that are quite vernacular in scale and character, that abut York Place and actually adjoin the St Clement's buildings. And that was picked up on by Historic England as particularly successful at integrating those. And then the taller buildings, which have this very high quality stone facade, address the river and the collegiate buildings on the other side. I mean, we may call them towers, but the reality is that they're tall looking because they're deliberately small in footprint. So again, they're not big, bulky buildings. And, you know, I think we were very heartened by, again, Historic England's approach. That they said the tower element is particularly successful. The proportions and detailing work well. It is high enough to act as a local landmark, while not so high that it competes with the historic cluster of towers and spires in the centre of the city. And that's very much, you know, it's not about compromise. It's finding that right balance. How do you create a characterful, distinctive place that is, you know, gives this a real sense of identity, but doesn't compete with the broader landscape. Just in terms of windows, I think, you know, historic buildings don't have they have to work in an energy efficient way, and they have a high level of detailing on the exterior of the building. So you can't exactly see it in the kind of images you're looking at, but you have a high quality stone facade with stone fins that articulate the flatter areas, stone ribs, and kind of traditional detail interest at different scales. Stone mullions on the stone buildings and oak mullions on the render buildings. So drawing on historic materials and details, but in a more contemporary way.
Can I just clarify? I think when you referred to something I said earlier, I wasn't talking about the tower. What I was talking about was what we call the link building, which is the building closest to York Place. I was responding to Dr. Collins's concern about that building and making the point that we had lowered that building in height and pulled it back further away from York Place to accommodate the concerns of the residents. So that wasn't about the tower.
That's one of the two-storey pitched roof buildings that are deliberately designed to integrate it.
Thank you.
So just to clarify,
is this through-
was just to clarify just one thing that the speaker said, if I may.
Okay.
So the 22-metre height, which is what I took from the report, which is one of the heights of the towers, that has always been in the plan. That's always been the height you've been aiming to have. Is that correct?
Well, in the process of a design, you work through views. It's where we ended up, having gone through all the views and other constraints within the project. It's what we thought was the best outcome.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
And I should say one of the aspects that's interesting is that's from the river terrace. So when we do, so it's a tall building and it's quite distinctive, but it's set down very low within the landscape, which is one reason it doesn't impact on the skyline. And it's not on the plane, it's set back from the plane. It's part of that riverine landscape.
Come in.
My questions aren't that related if you wanted to go. My questions are on a separate topic in case you wanted to continue on.
Okay, that makes sense to take yours first, Councillor Hunt, and then we'll...
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask the applicant whether, well, two things. Are you will there be will there be a higher density of students now on the corner of the plane in these two towers than are currently being housed in the buildings that you're knocking down? I
think Sarah will answer that.
Forgotten the second part of my question.
Do you want to just mention? And then
I just
we'll
wanted to
answer both?
understand whether there will now be a higher concentration of students on this corner of the plane in these tall towers that are going up. There's an application for them.
Yeah, there's an increase in 4 rooms. Due to the kind of current standards of rooms comparable to other colleges, that's what's driven the increased height and built form on the site, rather than a substantial increase in number of students and rooms.
I think it's probably because these are going to be ensuite rooms, and so the footprint of each student room, I imagine, will be bigger. So therefore, the net increase in student rooms will just be 4
Okay. Sorry, can I just come back, because I did remember the second part of my question. Is this the only place that Magdalen can house these students in terms of your footprint, in terms of your, overall?
Yes, it is. And the alternative, I guess, is that we would have to sell the building to be developed into, I don't know, a hotel or something like that, which would probably be poorer quality, because no one else will spend the kind of money that we would spend on this site. And we'd have to try and buy extra student accommodation, which would take it out of the private rental market. The beauty of this scheme is it enables us to meet our needs without increasing the footprint of the college and without impinging on the very scarce housing stock of Oxford.
Thank you.
Can I just add to that?
No, thanks. Rosie.
Thank you, Chair. My questions actually followed on from some of the things that Councillor Hollingsworth was saying around cycle safety, and I was hoping to ask about the construction kind of period and traffic management plan and ensuring pedestrian safety in particular and cycle safety in particular around that plane, and recognising that if the construction were to take up part of the pavement, you're now weaving a huge number of people around a very, very dangerous roundabout anyway. I just wondered if you could speak to a bit of that and how we would ensure within the traffic management plan or elsewhere that is kind of taken into account in the process. Thank you.
Yeah, so there is a condition for a construction traffic management plan, and throughout the course of this planning application, Oxfordshire Council Highways have been very aware of how sensitive this site is. They went away during the course of the application, asked for more information about collision data. So as part of that condition as well, looking at the construction traffic management plan, I'm sure they'll be very aware of the sensitivities and making sure that this construction can take place as safely as possible.
Is that supplementary?
Is that okay? Just very quickly, thank you. I just wondered, I recognised at some point it said that there's a possibility to avoid peak periods in traffic, and just also hope to ask, maybe out of naivety, around the impact of it being the difference between school time or like term time and non-term time on that roundabout is extraordinary, and just wondered whether, in terms of when we condition timings, whether there are phases of construction that could happen outside of term time.
I think in terms of, yes, peak hours, we always look at kind of rush hour at the beginning and end of the day, which would include school drop-off. But I think it would be too restrictive to say that construction can only take place outside of term time. So I think it's just looking at general peak hours.
And that will be for the county council to agree those terms of it. Okay. Are there any more questions? I don't see any, in which case I will ask Jill to make her presentation on the listed building application.
Thank you. Sarah's going to operate the computer for me since my computer has died. So if you can start. It's very quick and relatively short. Sorry. Minute. Apologies, sorry. This is a slide which is simply to identify the site of 9 to 13 6/7 as opposed to the entire site and the Wainfleet site. So this is the site that is relevant to the listed building consent application. And it shows the buildings of 9 to 13 with their rear ranges as existing. And this slide shows the relative ages of buildings which date between the 17th, late 17th through to the 18th and 19th century, 20th century pieces, and then some 21st century alterations. The majority of the rear ranges date from 18th, 19th century, and 20th century. This area, by the way, was Civil War ramparts prior to this. So if you can think about that date, this is post that date in terms of tenements and buildings arriving here. Next slide, please. So that just shows you a little bit more clearly the different dates. So you can see that you've got some elements of mostly late 20th century. So the brown elements in the rear ranges are late 20th century work. So you can see those main bits. You've got some mid to late 19th century, which has come up in the bright pink on the screen. And you've got then some early 19th century in yellow. But just to caveat that with most of these rear ranges have also been substantially altered through the 20th century and mostly post-war and 21st century. So there's a lot of alteration. So there's very little, there is historic fabric, but it's not a huge amount of historic fabric in those rear ranges. So that just gives you a sense of what is being demolished in the rear ranges. Thank you. Next slide, please. And that's just a first floor of the same thing. So you've got a late 20th century bit of first floor in that section of 9 and 10 on the back on the rear range. Next slide, please. That's just a slide of 1954 showing the building. So from left 9 to 13 through and 13. I mean, the demolition for Wainfleet was fairly dramatic. I mean, it was literally cut off at 9. And that's showing the rear range of 9 to 10. So the first two bits running back towards York Place, which shows you most of that element, which is mostly 20th century work, a little bit of 19th century in there. Next slide, please. That's showing the other side of that. So that was showing the east facade facing onto York Place. This is the facade of that same range, which faces into the Magdalen site, into the Wainfleet site presently. So that again shows you that rear facade of those buildings, which again, there's some 19th century brickwork there, but there's a lot of 20th century alteration in those buildings. Then, sorry, if you could go back, Sarah, which shows you, that shows you a little bit of first floor there and the infill, which is very definitely 20th century, as you can see. Next slide, please. This is showing you some interior shots. On the right-hand side there, you can see the staircase. One of the staircases is supposed to be taken out, which is a late 19th century, early 20th century staircase. You can see the state of the buildings inside, and you can see that they've been very much altered, and you've got a lot of 20th century, late 20th century work in some of those elements there. Next slide, please. That's looking at just as picking up the front facades of the buildings. There's a proposal to upgrade the buildings in terms of sustainability. A lot of these windows are 20th century windows, replacements on the building. On the next slide, if we could move, oh, sorry, that's the rear of that range, which again shows these 20th century sash windows. Next slide, please. Yeah, okay, so this shows the boundary wall, which is a boundary wall to York Place, which is the stone boundary wall, part of which is to be retained. The new building that's going in for Wainfleet was set back from the stone boundary wall to show the plot wall so that you retained that sense of the plot running through. And again, that shows the other side of the wall to York Place, and that stone boundary wall is staying that section through there. Next slide, please. That's just showing you the elements that are coming off the back. Again, showing you, yeah, so those are the elements to be demolished at the rear ranges of the 9 to 13. Next slide, please. Showing you in more detail the plan form, what's coming off. You can see at the back of those buildings. Again, I mean, I've explained it. This also shows what's happening inside the buildings, which is for the list of building consent application. So you can see that there are openings proposed in number 9, which currently opens into Wainfleet there, and that's to provide the connection through at that point for college. Then you've got the removal of a staircase to the rear, and that staircase, which I showed the slide of, in 9 and 10, which is coming out. But essentially, the plan form of those buildings remains, and that's critical because that's part of that earlier ranges of buildings at the front, which date between 17th and 19th century. The plan form is important. Next slide, please. So that's first floor. You can see the staircase coming out. You can see much of the plan form retained. You can see those rear ranges, the roofs at this point, because they're lower, coming off. And the next slide, please. That's it. So that's it. So essentially, the ranges coming off at the back, there's a low level of less than substantial harm caused to the significance of those buildings from those elements coming off at the back. But it's justified by the works proposed and the development of the site and the low level of significance of those rear ranges there's public benefits of the development and of the upgrading of the buildings, of the listed buildings, which outweighs that level of harm. And so officers are recommending that listed building consent be granted, subject to the conditions. There were a number of points that were raised by various amenity groups, and all of those have been taken care of through conditions. So,
thank you very much. Questions specifically on this listed building consent? Apologies, yes. We have no speakers against, but we have 3 speakers for this listed building application.
Very well. And there's little that we need to say other than that. We think, as Jill has said, that as far as the important elements of these listed buildings are concerned, we will improve their fabric. We will improve their heritage benefit. I think there are some rear extensions which you will have seen are not of the greatest quality. So looking at the site as a whole, we are clearly in the same camp as Jill in that we believe that we are bringing about a benefit in heritage terms as part of this scheme.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Okay, questions committee specifically on this? I don't see. Sorry, Alex.
Yes, I just want to check with the ground floor frontages, which are basically retail spaces of various descriptions now. Are they covered by this application? I just explain the reason for asking that. And that just, there are a number of streets around Oxford which have been developed in this way, and they end up with something blank and unopened facing out onto the street. And I could come up with umpteen examples, but I will use Worcester Place, which was college development. Yeah, that would be another one. So is there a proposition, or is it part of the planning process that active interaction between the ground floor unit and the building, is that protected by condition, or is that outside this application as a point of consideration?
It's not part of this sentence in that it's not a change to the. So
intention is that the active frontage will remain.
Absolutely, yes. And the shop fronts restored and repaired and.
Thank you. Any other questions? I don't see any, so I think we will now move on to discussion I imagine we'll discuss both of them, but then we'll take two votes on the different applications. Okay, who wants to kick off discussion? Jemima Hunt.
Thank you, Chair. I just have to admit that I'm very torn as regards this application in terms of height, and clearly there are criteria that have been met, but as a local councillor, as a cyclist, and as someone who had to go and talk to the media when the last fatality took place at the Plane when Lingfeldt was killed. The Plane is a highly fraught part of East Oxford that we're constantly battling with, constantly trying to resolve the issues of how overused it is and the safety problems that go along with that. And so the idea that these 2 large towers are going to be built on the corner of the Plane, while I understand they need to house students, while I understand that the buildings themselves may be sensitive, thoughtful and creative, I do not think that actually positioning these 2 tower blocks on the site of the plane is at all sensitive or creative or thoughtful. And it is problematic. However, I will obviously defer to officers on this, but it is a comment. I think we can all agree that the plane is a very fraught part of our landscape and something we're having to deal with a lot here in East Oxford.
Can I clarify, are your concerns about the built form, or are they more generally about the implications for safety during the construction phase, which will of course be dealt with by the Highways Authority under condition?
I think partly, but I think both. I mean, in terms of, yeah, I think both. Certainly during the actual process of building this, there's going to be a lot of issues regarding the plane. And then actually just, what thought has gone into actually putting forward a plan for 2 very high-rise buildings on the corner of the plane itself.
Okay, other comments? Alex?
Yes, so this is, I think, as Councillor Hunt said, like any planning application, in fact, pretty much every planning application, is there's got to be a balance being struck. So I'll start with the things which you'll have gathered from my questions. I feel I'm a little nervous about, not to the point of opposing the application, but I think so taking that issue, which is in the item 4 application, the protection of the ground floor street facing units, they're not being changed in the planning permission, but that means that potentially isn't the protection for them. You could just stop renting them and put up a little panel on the window, and that would be that, and the doors would never open, and they would be like many of the doors I can think of on streets where they are seized shut because all the activity is going backwards into the private space. So I mean, personally, I'd like to see a condition which ensured that they remained in use and thriving. You can't guarantee that the tenant is going to be a success as long as there is a new tenant on the cards if one of them fails. That's the issue for that. I've raised the issues about the cycle parking. They were also picked up by Councillor Rule. I'm not wholly convinced that the County Council is taking this seriously and erring, and building on that. The shrinking of the retail unit to one that is smaller, and therefore it won't have big lorries delivering it. One, I'm not entirely sure anyone who sees the size of lorries delivering to retail buildings would agree that that's actually what happens. But a small unit with a load of regular deliveries by vans or cars, that's going to be more dangerous than what they've got currently. So I would like that condition, which I believe is a condition, isn't it, to be quite robust on that, rather more robust than the County Council's current approach of, well, it'll probably be fine, so we don't really mind. I think they should mind and should take it more seriously. On the issue of the height of the buildings, I think it's the views from, there were a number of views that were shown in the slide. So the views in the Cowley Road, the view from the plane itself, those were all rather good. The one that matters is the one from the bridge, as you go over the bridge. And as you say, what we've currently got, which I believe John Betjeman was incredibly rude about before it was even finished, as he often was, is striking in its visual impact. Not whether it's strikingly positive is open to some question. So I think what is proposed is on balance no worse and perhaps slightly better. So I looked at policy DH2, with which I am reasonably familiar, having associated myself with it over a lot of time, just to check what we are asking of any building which exceeds the Carfax Tower height, so that height point we previously had as a fixed thing, and rightly changed. And that is, development above this height should be limited in bulk and must be of the highest design quality. So that's the test that we're looking at, those two things. And I think it doesn't immediately answer itself in that way. And I've seen somewhere I go, oh yeah, definitely limited in bulk, definitely of the highest design quality. I've had to think about this one a little bit and look at those images. And I think on balance, it is of a high quality. And it is because of the division between the two towers and them using the left. Is that the north? Yeah, the left side anyway, as being the highest one. I think it does meet the test that we've asked for in this case around the bulk. So I think on balance, humming and hawing a little bit and having expressed some concerns about the harms. And I think the loss of the heritage buildings is a little bit of a harm. And I appreciate the point, they're not massively significant, any of them, but that's the nature of the buildings that we have. There are many different bits of development over many centuries. They're a bit messy, they're a bit untidy, but that is what makes them an interesting building. In this case, they're needing to be removed, and I think I can tolerate that. So I think on balance, I'm coming down in favour of these, but I would like reassurance that those conditions about protecting those ground floor retail spaces in the listing building, that's as part of application 4. And then with application, I think it's application 4, and then with application 3, the condition about the cycle parking provision, not as, and the retail servicing, not as a, this will probably sort itself out and it doesn't matter, as Councillor Rawls said, it does matter on that roundabout, so we need to get it right.
Yes, just to quickly respond. Firstly, the retail units on St Clement's, there's no proposed change to those. And if there was to be any proposed change, then that would require listed building consent.
No, it would not. Occupation. It would not, because you could just not have a tenant. You don't need planning permission for that. That's my point.
You would need listed building consent to make a fabric alteration. So to remove the shop fronts, you would need listed building consent to do that. So to change those shop frontages, which is not what you mean. What you mean is you could leave them empty and they're not active. Now, how do we control?
I don't know if we can do that because those are not planning issues, are they?
It's not a listed building consent issue. I can't put it on the listed building consent.
You're talking about the viability of retail there and retaining an active frontage, which is desirable.
It is a condition to have an active street-facing frontage. So I appreciate that were there not to be tenants applying something, that's something you can't do, but that's what I'm after. Because otherwise we'll end up, and I point to Pembroke Street and what was your one?
Worcester Place.
And Worcester Place, both of them will prove exactly that.
Chair, can I just come in? Firstly, the plane obviously forms part of a shopping frontage in the city centre, city core. So, we've got restrictions there about, the uses that can go into that facility. We can't control if they haven't got a tenant in there. We can't force a tenant to come into those units. But clearly the college are going to want to, actively rent those out to people to use. So, you should have enough comfort to know that given where it is in terms of the shopping frontage in our shopping hierarchy in the local plan, there are controls there. There is a condition on the planning permission which talks about active frontages to try to limit anything being put in the windows in those circumstances to make them less active. So I think there's enough control. I understand the concerns you raise, but we can't force anything those properties to be used. But again, that's something that we've tried to control as much as we can in the report. So you should have enough comfort on that.
Just to reassure, it's the wording of that condition that I wanted discussed, and I am happy that the wording is acceptable for what I'm after.
Okay, so no, you don't want to make any changes to that?
No. I wanted to flag it and make sure that it was understood.
Nigel and Lawrence and Louise.
Well, it is, as ever in these stories, a balance, isn't it? And there are lots of positives about this application. So first of all, clearly the student accommodation at the moment is not satisfactory. I mean, you've been made a very convincing case about that. And it will become less and less satisfactory as time goes on. So I get the argument for replacing it. Secondly, what you're replacing it with is energy efficient. It is thoughtful about biodiversity. You know, it's got the multi-purpose space use, which is helpful, and maybe the community may be able to, I hope, make access to that, you know, under the right conditions, of course. I know it's a university building, it can't just be open all the time, but you could think about that. The area that still gives me concern is the height issue. And while it's set lower, as you say, it's still 4 meters higher than the present building, the highest tower. And the difficulties, I suppose, here is that if it was smaller and you took a story off, you'd have fewer student, so therefore it would suck out effectively more accommodation from within the rest of the city, which is something that we don't want to see. And in fact, there's a net gain here of 4. It's only 4, but at least it's neutral, basically, in this story, and it would become adverse. So for all those reasons, I will reluctantly support it. However, I'll just give you one piece of advice. I think you would have helped your case had you been able to visually demonstrate the relationship between the buildings, the new buildings, and the Magdalen Towers on the other side, because the principal heritage officer, you know, made that point that there was a sort of picking up of the parallelism here, but the visuals don't demonstrate that at all, not at all. And all they show me is one shot of tower blocks on the left-hand side going over the plain in isolation, looking rather bleak. So I think there is an issue about, just for future, about the way things come out. The balance sheet is positive, therefore on balance I will support it. Thank you.
Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. As has been said, this is development which is in a very sensitive location for all sorts of reasons. I regret the loss of the green open space adjacent to York Place. However, as has been said, it will improve facilities for students so that hopefully fewer will live out, depriving Oxford of probably family housing. However, I remain sceptical about the demolition rather than reusing the existing frame of the main building. But on balance, I will be supporting this officer's recommendation.
Louise and Rosie.
Thanks. So I won't repeat anything that of the people have said, but for me, I think it will be an improvement on the 1970s Wainfleet building that's there at the moment, where that first floor overhang really gives a very depressing area at the moment, which you said just collects litter and is pretty grim. That view of the two buildings from the bridge, for me, is a lot more attractive than the one solid mass of the Wainfleet that is there at the moment. I appreciate they're taller, but if they are, the college mentioned honey-coloured stone. So, and I know that the materials are conditioned. So, if it is in that attractive stone colour, that will, I think, fit well with the existing buildings that there are in the city. And for me, that is more interesting and more attractive than what is there at the moment. That it's set back a bit more from the river, so you have there will be more greenery around it as well. So I'm minded to approve it. And can I move approval of this with all of the conditions that are listed?
I have a seconder. That Barbara. Okay.
We've got the additional condition as well, so it's just whether you want to accept that condition in the officer update, which was clarifying the use of the multi-purpose space that we considered should be ancillary to this student accommodation.
Yeah, are you happy to accept that additional? Yeah, okay, both of you, fine. Rosie, you want to come back?
I've entered. Thank you, Chair. I also share a lot of the comments that have been said, so I won't repeat. But appreciating especially the passive house standard of these buildings and the upgrade more broadly, but that is quite rare to see that come through. But I kind of hoped to move towards the question around whether we could instill stronger conditions around the cycling and pedestrian safety in particular during the construction. And I might lean on my wiser colleagues who have been on the committee longer or officers to ask how that might be possible, because I feel like currently in the conditions it says the details of the times will be available, but the layout of the plan will be provided. But I suppose what I'm trying to suggest is that it would be good to be able to prioritise the safety of cyclists and pedestrians, and how can we ensure that that's the case within the condition? Thank you.
Chair, can I help with that? I mean, I think we all understand, I think Councillor Hunt made the point that around the plane it can be quite fraught. I think this is quite a good way of putting it. So we understand the issues there. We also understand the circumstances, tragic circumstances that have happened there recently. So, you know, we understand that. I think the County Council understand that. I think the best thing to do, we hear the comments, we make a note of those in the minutes. We maybe add an informative to the planning application that the committee are concerned about that. It's very difficult to tighten up conditions to sort of strengthen what you're saying, because in the way the conditions are worded, you expect that to be delivered anyway, and you expect all construction traffic management plans to think about safety of pedestrians, cyclists, just by their nature, because no construction traffic management plan is going to, say, look, let's not put that their safety first. So we'll take that away. We'll talk to the county council, and the applicants heard that this evening. So obviously they will go into contract with the contractor, so it's their responsibility also to try and make sure that's managed effectively. So I think that's the only way we can do it, but it's absolutely valid concern, and I think we can try to deal with it that way.
Do you have any more comments? I think people recognise it's a balanced application, difficult one, and on a fraught site. But realistically, despite all the worries about the plane, we couldn't say we can never develop anything around there because of the dangers. The thing is, as Andrew has said, we need to have very robust measures in place to ensure safety at all times. We've got a proposal on the table to support this application. We're talking specifically about item 3 now, and we will then return to listed building consent. So can I see all those in favour with the conditions together with the additional condition that Sarah mentioned? So all those in favour, can I see? All those against? And any abstentions? 1 abstention. Thank you. That is carried. We'll now move on to item 4, which is the listed building consent. Do we have any additional comments on this, or do we move to a committee happy to move to a vote on this? Think so. In which case, all those in favour of the application as proposed with the attachment. Sorry, who's
I'm happy to propose.
And Louise, you're happy to second? Okay, in which case, all those in favour of the officer's recommendation with all the attached conditions, all those in favour, please show. And all those against? No. And any abstentions? 1 abstention. Okay. Both those applications are carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Not at all. Thank you. Thank you. Reiterate just again, as much care as can be taken on the construction phase. That's very important to us all. I think we're now going to move on to agenda item 5, which is the clinical manufacturing facility at the Churchill Hospital. And Nia, you're going to presentation. Thank you.
Go, it's working. Great, so this is an application seeking planning permission for the erection of a modular manufacturing building and associated works at the clinical biomanufacturing facility at Churchill Hospital in Headington. So the clinical biomanufacturing facility is located on the eastern side of Churchill Drive within the wider Churchill Hospital site. The facility is used for clinical medicine and provides the link between academic research and clinical drug development to make rapid progress into clinical trials. So immediately to the west and south of the existing building, which is here, that is this parcel of land, which comprises a mixture of hard surfacing and undeveloped land. And it's this parcel of land where the new modular manufacturing building and associated works are proposed. Prior to submitting this application, the project ecologist translocated a small population of common lizards from the site to a receptor site, and it's this area in red to the east, which that is. Okay. So this is a view from the north of the site looking south, where you can see the existing clinical biomanufacturing facility on the right, and much of the existing hard surfacing on the site, including the existing parking areas to the front. This is another view looking from the north looking south, where you can see some of the undeveloped area within the existing building again on the right for context, and the proposed building would sit immediately to the left of the existing building. This is a view from the north of the site looking east, where you can see the existing service road, which the application site on the right of this photo would link up to. And this is another view from the west of the site adjacent to Churchill Drive, where you can see the service road in the context of the existing building on the right. This is another view just to the west of the building looking south down an existing service lane, which part of the application site lies just to the south of this, wrapping round the existing building. And this is where the proposed soakaway would be located. This is a view from Churchill Drive to the southwest, looking across the existing building, with the land to the south of this being where, again, the soakaway and the plant will be located just behind the modular building itself. And this is another view from the same spot looking directly east, where you can see the changing ground levels at the site getting lower to the south. And you can see the Live Valley SSSI is located in the background of the image to the south, generally where the trees are located. This is another view from the south of the site, from the car park, looking up towards the application site. So you can see again the clear change in ground levels getting higher to the north, and the parcel of land where the lizards were translocated prior to the application being submitted are located to the right of the image. And this is the last view, and this is taken from Churchill Drive to the southwest of the site. And this just gives some context as to the wider built form on the site. The closest non-designated heritage assets to the site itself is the Churchill Hospital East entrance, which is located to the north out of view of this image, sort of right up there. So this is the existing block plan showing the site, and you've got the existing building here, and to the east and south you can see a mixture of the hard landscaping already there together with the undeveloped land. Proposed block plan, you've got the building proposed, which will be sited immediately to the east of the existing building. You've got parking area sited to the north, the service road with the lay-by wrapping round to the south, joining up to the existing service lane to the west. This is the proposed ground floor plan of the new building, with the entrance situated on the northwest corner, facing onto the existing service road to the north. And this is the lower plant area plan, showing again the details of the service road wrapping round the building with the soakaway onto the west and plant to the east. These are some roof plans of the building. You can see the majority of the plant is sited to the rear of the building, and there are solar panels located to the north of the roof. So on the top, you can see the north elevation of the building in the context of the existing CBF building to the right. And on the bottom, you see the east elevation and the difference in ground levels, which is clear, dropping to the south. You can also see the height of the building, and whilst at its maximum would be 1 metre above the existing building, it shows the height varies across roof level, and that would not, the 1 metre taller projection would not be consistent across the whole of the roof level. Again, we've got the south elevation on the top with the context of the existing building to the right, and on the bottom we have the west elevation. So you can see again the plant in more detail at the rear and the external plant to the south of the site beyond the service lane again. And lastly, we have some 3D views. So on the top right, you can see a view from the northeast. To the left, you can see a view from the northwest. And in the bottom right, you can see a view from the southeast. These show the scale of the development in relation to the neighbouring buildings on the site. So just as a verbal update to the committee, as noted in the committee report, the application is recommended for approval subject to Natural England removing their objection. Council have not received further comments from Natural England, and as such the objection still stands. However, as emphasised in the committee report, officers expect the objection to be removed in due course, given the February groundwater readings showed a drop in the groundwater level compared to the previous reading. So overall, the proposed development is considered to be acceptable with regards to its design and would not cause any detrimental harm upon the character and appearance of the surrounding area, nor the setting of the non-designated heritage assets on the wider Churchill site. The proposals will not cause any detrimental impacts upon the amenity of any neighbouring occupiers, nor will the proposal cause any impacts in relation to highways and car parking, bicycle storage, sustainable design and construction, land quality, archaeology, nor trees. In addition, the proposal as amended will not cause any detrimental impacts with regards to drainage, biodiversity and the Lye Valley SSSI. So subject to the recommended unilateral undertaking, conditions and informatives, and Natural England removing their objection, proposals are considered to comply with the relevant policies of the local plan, the Headington neighbourhood plan and the NPPF.
Thank you very much, Nia. We don't have anybody to speak against the application, but we've got 4 people who registered to speak in favour. So if you could come forward now, please.
One of them was, wasn't it? Hello.
Thank you. And you have
this clinical biomanufacturing facility, the expansion of which we're here to talk about today. So the CBF was founded in 1995 to make novel medicines for the university that can be used in clinical trials. We were the first UK academic facility to be licensed to do this, and are a unique, I think, has a global reputation for driving innovation in vaccine research. We were the facility that made the first batch of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine in record time in 2020 in response to the pandemic. And we've also manufactured vaccines to treat some of the world's most serious other diseases, so malaria, tuberculosis, Zika, rabies, plague, influenza. But we could do more, and that's the point of this application. So my current facility is housed on the adjacent land to the plot that we're talking about. And the current facility size and design mean that we're limited to manufacturing only one product at once. So that means I can only put 3 of the university's innovative ideas through into clinical trials each year. That means I have a fully booked manufacturing slots right through to 2027. So I'm just unable to meet the demand for manufacturing within the current building. This new building is the solution to that. If you grant us permission, it will be built using funds from the university and in partnership with Cancer Research UK. It contains 2 additional clean room spaces essential for manufacturing, and that will enable my team to increase output to 8 products a year. This means we'll no longer be limited just to vaccine research, but we'll be able to broaden our scope to make and test new therapies, including monoclonals, gene therapies, hoping to treat diseases such as cancer, neurodegenerative disorders, and also to apply some gene therapy approaches. My team will grow to do that from 25 full-time personnel to about 40. So we hope to continue to support the university's efforts, getting new medicines into trials, potential to reduce disease burden, both here in the UK and globally. And we thank you for your consideration.
So if you're happy just to remain where you are in case anyone's got any specific questions relating to the application. Thank you. Okay, questions. Can I kick off and just ask if you're increasing the size of the facility, are you, I couldn't see anything in the report about how many more staff you're proposing to employ?
So I currently have between 25 and 27 full-time equivalents, depending on how many vacancies I've got, and that will go up to somewhere around 38, 40.
Okay, so a net increase of about 15
personnel.
Right. Okay, thank you. That's helpful to know. Louise.
Thanks. It's obviously this is going to be hopefully an incredibly productive facility. I'm just wondering, why have you gone for just a 1-story building? I could, if you had 2-story buildings, you could have twice as much. It just seems it's not a very dense use of the space. That's all.
I think because of the plant requirements that are associated with the labs, actually building at 2-story makes it very difficult to accommodate all of the plant, particularly between the floors. And so the most productive way to use the space has been to provide that 1-story building.
Thank you. Alex, did you have a question?
Yes, mine is on the Natural England existing objection. Can I just ask officers to be clear what exactly, we got the recommendation for approval, but with that objection still standing, what precisely are you asking or recommending recommending members of the committee to do? Are you recommending to approve until such time as this objection is withdrawn? What if that case, if Natural England failed to withdraw it? What does that mean? Will we be, as a planning authority, issuing a decision to refuse, or what? Or just this one with a big condition on it?
Yes, so the Natural England objection at the moment, we are expecting for it to be removed. So the latest comments that we received, they explicitly asked the applicants to do a further monitoring of the groundwater levels on the site. That's because they expect the February levels to be the wettest on record, so that they could get the worst case scenario for the soakaway. So Natural England had already seen the previous borehole results, and they saw the January result, and the February result was lower than the previous one. So we expect that it is going to be removed. So we are asking for you to approve today, subject to them withdrawing their objection. If they don't remove that objection, which we as a council would be very surprised at, we wouldn't be able to approve because Natural England are a statutory body and it would have to be referred to Secretary of State, from my understanding, which we wouldn't want to be doing. So we would need to revise the scheme further based on those comments and come back to committee to decide again.
Clear. Any other questions?
Yeah,
And Nigel.
The original people who asked for it to be called in were concerned about the drainage in the catchment area of the Lyre Valley SSI. Now, there's a long set of explanations and backwards and forths of whether this site's actually in, or the drainage area would be in the SSI or not. Can you just maybe condense simply what the story is here? Because I, having read it 2 or 3 times, I'm a bit confused as to whether their original concern is negated by the fact that it actually doesn't have much relationship to the Lyre Valley SSI. So maybe you could assure me that it's not an issue, if you like, please.
Should we just introduce, this is Dr. James Barlow, who's our flood officer in the City Council, just in case you haven't met him before.
Yeah, and welcome to your first planning committee.
Yes.
Yeah, it can be summed up quite simply. It's quite difficult to determine the catchment. Generally underground, refers to groundwater. There was a previous study quite a long time ago commissioned by the City Council, undertaken by Kurt Lambeth, which came up with one catchment boundary based on his interpretation of the geology, etc. The City Council currently have commissioned, and there's currently an updated study going on to support the forthcoming local plan, undertaken by a consultant who's come up with a slightly different interpretation of the catchment. This is yet unpublished, so we have referred to it within our comments as it's the best available information from our perspective. And the hydrogeologist for the applicant came with a slightly different one again. So it's very much on interpretation. To summarise where we are with it, it either doesn't fall in the catchment or it does and it is mitigated. So either way, the key bit is there is not a negative impact. If it falls outside the boundary, no mitigation is needed. If it does, we're satisfied that it is mitigated.
Thank you.
Okay. Further questions? No? Comments? Alex?
In light of the fact it found a bit of the policy test in SP19, which justified the development, given the point about the lengthy debates about flooding or not, issues, I'll paraphrase what you just said, but as ever, having been resolved successfully, can I recommend approval, please? With the natural England thing as worded.
Do we have a seconder for that?
Yeah.
Lawrence? Yep. I think all those in favour of the application, please show. I think that's unanimous, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
You've got a mic down there. Okay, we're now going to move on to our final application of the evening, which is agenda item 6, and this is London Road in Headington. And Nia George, you're presenting again. Thank you.
Yep, so this is an application seeking planning permission for the demolition of the existing buildings at 253, 255 and 257 London Road, and the erection of a part 3, part 4-storey building and associated works to create 9 flats in use as houses of multiple occupation. So the site lies on the corner plot between London Road and Barton Road within Headington. To the west, you have the Headington District Centre, which is an area of change and transport hub as allocated in the Oxford local plan. And to the east, the Headington roundabout leading out of the city. The site itself is not an allocated site for development and lies 500 metres outside of the district centre boundary. So this is a view looking at the front of the site from London Road. The existing buildings comprise of a partly commercial use and partly residential use above. However, the units are currently vacant. This is a view from the Barton Road to the west, looking at the rear of the site. The buildings have been extended in the past by 1- and 2-storey additions, and there is also a garage to the north. So this is a view from the junction between London Road and Barton Road, looking to the north with the application site on the right. You can see 2-storey pitched roof dwellings in the background with Barton Bradley Recreation Ground on the right where those trees are. This is a view from the southwest of London Road where you can see the application site in the centre with the surrounding built form. Again, primarily 2-storey pitched roof buildings front onto the London Road. This is a view from the top of Gladstone Road where it meets London Road with the application site in the centre. Here you can see the fenestration detailing of surrounding buildings, primarily with wide bay windows with a horizontal emphasis. And this is a view from the north side of London Road to the east of the application site. You can see the existing buildings to the right of the image. This shows the use of materials in the locality, primarily being a mixture of render, brick and tiled roofs. Another view from the north on Barton Road, looking south towards the junction at London Road with the application site on the left. You can see the setback of the current building from the junction. And this is just a final photograph to show the front of the site and the existing setback from the junction in closer detail, the current openness of the corner plot. And this would be where the proposed basement gardens would be located to the front. So these are the existing elevations of the building with the south front elevation in the top left, east side elevation to the top right, north rear elevation to the bottom right, and the west side elevation to the bottom left. And you can see on the front elevation in context to the neighbouring property. Existing floor plans, the buildings are set over 3 stories. So you've got the ground floor on the top, the first floor to the left, and the second floor, which is contained within the roof of the building to the bottom right. And this is the existing block plan, which again just shows the siting of the building in relation to the neighbours on London Road and Barton Road. So these are the proposed floor plans. So the basement level is on the left with the ground floor to the right. You can see the courtyard gardens to the north and south of the building with light wells to the west and the storage areas for bins and bikes, as well as the communal garden to the north. The communal garden and the courtyard garden, and the light wells would be visible from London Road and the Barton Road, given their site in close proximity to the pavement. And given the size of the front courtyard garden, the basement will also be visible in the street scene too. More proposed floor plans. So you've got the first floor on the left, second floor to the right. The flats would be served with balconies to the north and south on top of the staggered flat roofed form of the building. And again, we've got the third floor plan on the left with the roof plan to the right. Again, this shows the flat roof form of the building, and you've got solar panels on the roofs as well. So on the top, you see the south elevation of the proposal fronting onto London Road. The height rises to the west of the site next to the junction with Barton Road. On the bottom, we have the west elevation fronting onto Barton Road. Here you can see the boxy design of the building with its vertically emphasised fenestration in comparison to the surrounding dwellings with their traditional pitch roof forms and horizontally emphasised fenestration. Again, on top, we have the eastern side elevation, on the bottom, the northern rear elevation, with the bin and bicycle storage areas located to the north of the building. Here you can see the top floors of the building, which will be finished in the dark standing seam metal, contrasting with the light buff brick below, with the metal roofs extending well above the tiled roofs of the neighbouring dwellings. These are some proposed elevations showing the building with context of the basement and the light wells and the courtyard gardens proposed to serve it. So the top left, you've got a view from the west, top right, a view from the south, bottom right, a view of the north, and bottom left, a view of the east. And this emphasises the scale of the basement, in which the two flats proposed wholly underground will be clearly seen from the street scene due to the openness of the plot and proximity to the pavements. So overall, the development is considered to be unacceptable. The proposal, due to its scale, massing, form and detailed design, in particular its predominantly flat roof form, use of materials, inclusion of a basement with underground gardens and vertical fenestration detailing, would result in an overly bulky and prominent form of development which would fail to appropriately respond to the context of the site, appearing as an alien feature within the street scene, causing harm to the predominantly low-scale domestic townscape character of the area. The proposal would not create or enhance local distinctiveness, nor would it respond appropriately to the site and character of the area, nor would it be an innovative design which would enhance the identity, character and setting of the area. So as such, the proposal would be considered contrary to policies DH1 and RE2 of the Oxford Local Plan, policies GSP4, CIP1 and CIP3, the Headington Neighbourhood Plan, as well as the MPPF.
Thank you very much. And we have one speaker who wishes to speak in favour of the application. Come forward, please. And it's Mr. James, and you have 5 minutes in which to speak. Yes. Yeah, I assume. Thank you. Yeah.
Right button.
Okay, thank you. Right. I appreciate that you've got a recommended refusal here. So I'm appreciative of the councillors who called this in. Yeah, what we're aiming to do is upgrade the London Road, which is pretty grim. I think any visitor to London would be disappointed coming in along the London Road. And as I say, this is a sustainable site where policy strongly encourages high density. So that's what we're aiming to do with this application. There have only been a handful of objections from immediate neighbours, and the officers say in their report that the impact on neighbours' light and privacy is acceptable, that the building would not be overbearing. So they accept amenity, bins, bikes, cars, access, the type of accommodation, amount of accommodation, standard of accommodation, all fine. So the only real issue here is really the design and the height of the building. It's not a political issue, there's no angry mob, so and there's no adverse impact on anyone, it's purely about design. The argument basically is that the building should enhance what is locally distinctive. I think our argument is that there really isn't anything of local distinction here. It's rundown, generic suburbia, and it could be on the fringe of any market town. There's nothing Oxford about it. And there's nothing of any scale about it that implies this is a world-class city. So I suppose what we're aiming to do is add some variety and distinction and to enrich the area. And why should new development be constrained by an area's ordinariness? My practice, I'm a local architectural practice. We've been here about 30 years. I care very much about Oxford, and over the last 30 years, I've seen no real improvements to the London Road, and it's a shame. We have many design awards, Oxford Preservation Trust Awards, RIBA Awards. In fact, we were in the Observer at the weekend with a comment about our project being a triumph of style and sustainability. So you do have the assurance that this building is designed by architects with a national reputation for design excellence, and that's what we're aiming for here. We're working for a client who is committed to building something of real and lasting quality to replace, as you saw, something which is really quite grim at the moment. The officer's report is critical of our design, several times wrongly calling it flat-roofed and using terms like boxy. These are subjective comments, but you can tell from the elevations that the building is not a blank box. It has generous balconies, it's articulated with perforated brickwork, it changes material on the top floor, and it has a kind of jaunty butterfly roof on the corner. It's carefully considered, it's got variety, pleasing proportions, and uses high quality materials. It will create local distinctiveness, and as such, it does comply with policy DH1. You've seen the drawing comparing this to 152 London Road, which was refused. We don't think that those reasons for refusal apply here. 152 is much bigger and taller than this. That one is flat roofed and boxy, and with no change between the top and bottom. This one is much smaller, it steps up and down, it has much greater variety in form and material. And also, it's not big, it is mainly 1, 2, and 3 stories. There's only one bit on the corner that rises to 4 stories, and it is actually good urban design to go up at the corner. The houses round about all have permitted development rights to put a whole extra floor on, so they could all be 3 stories. So we're not really going up much at all, and in any case, you should go up on corners. That's good design. What we're proposing is the same height as buildings on Iffley Road, Cowley Road, Woodstock Road, and the same height as Georgian Villas going into Cheltenham or Bath. It's not big, what we're proposing. It's just a bit bigger than the things there at the moment. It's not huge, it's not outrageous, and it will add variety to this corner of the street. 1 or 2 smaller points. The light well at the front is actually protected from the road by quite a wide band of planting, so I don't think it would be hugely visible from anyone walking on the pavement or driving along the road. In fact, when this was in the Oxford Mail, there were only 4 comments, 2 about unrelated sites, and 1 comment, if I can find it, sorry, how am I doing for time? These are just locals. One person said, I think that London Road heading in from the roundabout should be built up to 4 or even 6 stories, with a grand avenue of handsome mansion block types. So, and another person said,
I think your time is up
okay,
now.
yeah, another person said this should be way taller. So I think there is support for common sense that the London Road needs an upgrade. This is a site where we have the opportunity to do it, and it's a corner site, which would call for something taller anyway. And of course, it addresses Oxford's housing need with a much denser development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if you're happy to stay in case anyone has any technical questions for you, thank you. Questions, committee? Lord.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask for some clarification about whether the sort of basic objection to this is that the design is not very good, which is what I would agree with, or is it the overall height of the building? Or both?
So in terms of the refusal reason, we have mentioned height in it, but at pre-app stage, we've already said that this site is suitable for an increase in height, but it's actually the overall design and the detailing of the design which we think together with the height as articulated is what is unacceptable. So for example, if I go back to this elevation, which shows it in context with the street scene, the way that the principle of, you can see the red outline of the existing building is already taller than other surrounding buildings, and therefore as such there is principle to be higher than other buildings in the area. However, the articulation, especially the flat roof form, I know that there's the butterfly roof form which has been referred to, but I think when you look at that side elevation from Barton Road, there's a slightly monopitched roof, but overall you get the general sense of a flat roofed, quite bulky form, which we think would stand out and be quite harsh in this context where you have the pitched roofed, more traditional forms of development. Also the, as we mentioned, the materiality, although the height, the top two floors have been made in a darker colour to sort of, replicate the darker pitched roofs of the surrounding properties. Those pitched roofs will actually be, very much a contrast to the flat roofed, darker boxed shaped building, which we're going to get, because you've got standing seam metal, which will be quite reflective, and it will, be quite noticeable compared to the tiles of the surrounding areas. So it's not necessarily the height, but the way it's been articulated and the particular design form, which we do not think is acceptable.
Thank you. Alex and Louise.
In the proposed reasons for refusal, it cites 2 specific local plan policies and 3 from the neighbourhood plan, and then says, as well as the NPPF. Which bit of the NPPF?
Yeah. So I think in my, the design section, I haven't actually mentioned a paragraph or chapter of the NPPF, so that's something to note. Generally, the I think it's chapter 16. I think I'm right.
It's paragraphs 131 to 141.
131 to 141.
I think there's
paragraphs of the chapters.
Essentially, the NPPF promotes high quality design. So it's essentially what the Oxford local plan is looking for in terms of high quality design. I can't think exactly what those paragraphs states to hand, but generally high quality design, which we feel that this isn't.
Louise.
Thanks. Okay, right. Thank you. So I absolutely get that we do need to be getting denser, and I think if you're going to build higher, then the corner plot is a place to put it. But I do think it's got to, we can't just suddenly start doing that randomly in the middle of roads. And so for me, how close it is to the existing taller buildings of the district centre of Headington is quite important. How far is this away from the sort of the nearest other tall buildings? The nearest other buildings are more than the sort of 2-storey domestic ones.
About half a mile or so.
It's 500 metres from the eastern boundary of the district centre. So I can't give you the exact heights of those buildings, but it essentially starts, you've got a Bury Knoll Park, and essentially anything to the left of that is the district centre.
Yeah. David.
I really like this design. I'm not sure in this context, in its setting, that it suits that locality. But in terms of design, I actually really do like it. I'm just a little bit worried about the setting and the locality and any loss of visual amenity from neighbours. But in terms of design, I don't have an issue with it at all. Thank you.
I think, are we moving into comments now? Do you have, yeah, and I would also say that in terms of design, what we have to do here is look at it in context and the height and the massing. You know, we've all got our own personal views about what we like and don't like, and we don't want to redesign it or send out. But
it's the height combined with the design features of them. Yeah, it's all sort of interlinked, I suppose. So it's not necessarily the height of the maximum 4-storey part. It's
so
how
the mass next to smaller buildings creates that extra mass. Is that what the issue is?
Yes, and I think you can see from the Barton Road elevation in particular, where you've got the staggered form going down, so it's quite long. But then you've also got the articulation of the building. So, like I mentioned, the vertical emphasis of the fenestration, especially, and how that appears on those elevations in the context of the surrounding buildings next to it, and the contrasting materials as well, which is quite cleanly seen on that elevation as well.
I think we are taking comments now. Nigel, do you want to, and
Yeah, I mean, this, of course, design is always in the eye of the beholder to some extent, and we need to be careful, but when put alongside size and scale and juxtaposition, I do understand why you have significant reservations about it. I mean, it looks to me like you've dropped a bit of the Barbican, frankly, into the middle of London Road. It's got quite a lot of the same look. And the Barbican works because it's a massive development in a different context completely to a suburban street. And I find particularly the second image at the bottom, the sort of the slabbiness of the walls and thing, it just doesn't sit comfortably against. I mean, you may call it suburban, and you may call it old-fashioned, and you may call it sort of sub Tudor, really, which is the sort of style of the rest of the road. But that's not going to change quickly, and therefore anything that goes in there has got to sit sympathetically alongside it. It can't just dictate itself against it. And I don't think it sits sympathetically alongside it. I think it's an interesting, innovative design in the wrong place. So for that reason, I couldn't support it.
is that, are you recommending to go with the officer's decision?
Exactly, yeah.
Right. Okay, fine. Do we have any more comments then on the, oh, sorry, Lawrence, Alex, Jemima.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think there's any disagreement that we need more homes in Oxford. We just need to build taller on bus routes near shops and offices, especially with no cars. This site is well suited to having a higher density development. It's not really a leafy corner in a conservation area. It's a large corner plot on a busy transport artery. However, there are several issues of design, criticisms of the design in the officers' reports, but they all seem fixable. I'll be voting in favour of the officer's refusal, but would strongly urge the applicant to listen to the officers' concerns over the design and to reapply with a proposal that is more visually acceptable.
Can I be next, because my battery's about to run out and I need to read a bit of the NPPF. I think the principal point here is what's appropriate development for a part of Oxford which has the structure, the building size, the densities that were very typical and popular in the 1920s and 30s. And there's quite lots of bits of Oxford that are like this. They are, compared to bits of Oxford built before and bits of Oxford built afterwards, extraordinarily low density as a result. And I think the point that any of us who've had to face these difficult issues of looking at the overall housing need issue for Oxford and where it should go, I think have to reflect on the fact that there are going to need to be challenges over design in places like this. Because, and if you look, you know, if we look further up the London Road, past the roundabout, you'll see developments not dissimilar to this on the edge of Risinghurst, for example. You know, they're in slightly larger sites, so there is a dissimilarity, but it's not dissimilar. What concerns me about the wording of the recommendation is that we're opposing this because it makes a change to the sense of this area, the layout area, and I just don't agree with that as a principal reason for refusal. If it was something about the specific housing conditions of the 9 units here or something like that, I'd feel much more comfortable with it. I'd feel much less comfortable about this. And with those specific paragraphs of the NPPF, I thought I ought to go and double check, because I also know about these things. And the paragraphs 131 and 132 in particular refer to local plans. And it says plans should, at the most appropriate level, set out a clear design vision and expectations so that applicants have as much certainty as possible about what is likely to be acceptable. And it goes on. And I think that poses a challenge to us collectively as the local planning authority, that perhaps while we've met it in some areas, we've not necessarily met it in areas like this in a helpful and constructive way. So I'm not going to be voting for the officer's recommendation. I shall vote against it, and then we'll see what happens if it fails.
Thank you. Jemima.
Yeah, I would like to add to that, really. I think there's a double standards here, because actually this is a socio-economic area that needs change. And it seems to me what we're asking for is the first of a new type of building to go up in an area that is, as we can see, predominantly low-rise, small terrace houses. But we're quite happy for large-scale developments to be built in college grounds and in other parts of Oxford, and not in, you know, the London Road, Barton Road. So it seems to me that actually this is calling for building, and as Councillor Hollingsworth has pointed out, if you go beyond the roundabout on the right, there are all sorts of developments and blocks of flats there. So yes, I mean, it seems to me that this is actually you know, it's a prime area for a new development of this type to be built.
Please.
I think I will be supporting the officer's recommendation to refuse this one. I agree with Councillor Hedwood. The building itself, I think, is good. And if it was right in the middle of the Headington District Centre, then I'd be very happy with it. But where it is, it's going to be sticking out like a sore thumb for a long time. If it's 500 metres away from that centre, if we are going to go higher there, I think it just needs to be something that does blend in a bit more and doesn't look so completely different. So yes, that's the way I'll be voting.
Other comments? Mosey.
No, this might have been a question, sorry, but I just wanted to sort of clarify a comment on the narrative of needing more homes in Oxford, which is correct, but I just wanted to check this is 9 dwellings rather than 10, so therefore isn't bound by our policy on having affordable homes. So we're not talking about affordable homes necessarily in this proposal. Yeah, which I think is important to, in terms of the current narrative.
Yeah, can I just comment on that? I think it is a really important point to make, and we do pick up on that in the report. I mean, it is a big building, and obviously we don't agree with that, so we haven't explored that as an issue. But there could be an argument that you could get 10 units on this site. You know, you've got 6 4-bed HMO flats. Is it from memory? It's 1 2-bed, and I'm going to say 2 3 beds or something like that. Yeah. So you know, that is a very good point. You know, we are getting HMO accommodation out of this. We're not getting 10 flats, of which some could be socially rented. So I don't think this is the correct form for this site. You know, and I think we've talked a lot about the scale and massing, and I think you could achieve something better on this site, which satisfied all of those requirements. We're not disagreeing with some of the points that are being made. We do think this site can take development, but we have had a number of rounds of pre-app discussion, and clearly we just can't reach an agreement. But I think, you know, hopefully following this meeting, of the officer recommendation is agreed with, then perhaps we can have some more proactive discussions with the applicant and their agent as to what is acceptable on this site. And we have had design input as well. So our design officers have fed into this process. So we have very carefully considered it for all the reasons that Nia said, and that is why we think it's acceptable, very much to do with the scale and the massing.
We have got a proposal on the table to accept the officer's recommendation and refuse it. I think that's been seconded. Is that Barbara? No, sorry. David, sorry, David. Can we therefore go ahead and vote on the officer's recommendation to refuse? Those that support the officer's recommendation? And those against? 3, and abstentions, 1 abstention. In which case that is refused on the grounds outlined in the officer's report. Okay, thank you. Can we now, thank you for coming along, and can we now move on to the minutes, item 5. Which are on page 175. Page 5, 176, 177, 178. 179, 180, and 181. And then just to note forthcoming applications, dates of future meetings. Thank you, everybody. There is, because thank you, Louise. Yes, for the next meeting, because of Ramadan, we are going to start half an hour later, so that those who want to break fast can do so before the start of the meeting. Thank you. I thought that was later. I think. Uswa, can you just remind us about the?
Is it April?